Any weapon that you can possibly think of, every small arm in the world, virtually, has shown up in Ukraine. Newer AKs actually got rid of that and put rails on top of the dust cover. So Russians have this new rifle, new rail system that breaks if you put it into safety or take it off safe too quickly, and you can't mount any of the new optics to it. I wouldn't say that the Ukrainians are hurting just because they have such a random mismatch of gear. They're all very well equipped. The infantry equipment side of things has been largely satisfied for the Ukrainian soldier. The Russians are capable of making good gear. Did they make enough? No, nobody anticipated a long war. My name is Benjamin Schiff. I go by the online handle Oxide. I am a subject matter expert in Russian equipment, including small arms and infantry equipment, and I am an attack helicopter pilot in the U.S. Army. By and large, the Russian military and their allies, mostly the Luhansk and Donetsk militias, have been using their own Soviet-Russian produced equipment. As far as weapons are concerned, you can divide the weapons into 4 separate categories: standard issue, surplus, imported, and captured. So by and large, the Russian forces have been using their own standard issue equipment, including new generation AK-12s, and the militia forces have been using whatever they can get their hands on, be it Soviet surplus or even occasionally World War II surplus. However, by and large, the Russian forces have used their own indigenously produced weapons, and they haven't really received any imported weapons on par with Ukraine. There are some captured examples of weapons being used by Russian mercenaries and Russian soldiers to a limited extent, but mostly it's a motley propaganda collection of just about every weapon that has been donated to Ukraine. I would say that captured weapons are not really a significant stock or really affecting the war in Russia's favor, as they have such a huge surplus of Soviet weapons and their own indigenously produced weapons. And there has been some problems with the Russian AK-12 series as well, especially at the beginning of the war with the first generation AK-12. When the AK-12 was introduced, it had a big issue with the safety, where soldiers would take the weapon off of safe and they'd use too much force and actually break the safety on the first generation AK-12, rendering the weapon stuck in a safe position, making it virtually useless. They also had some issues with the actual issuing of optics. The AK-12 was the first issued Russian AK with indigenous rail system included, but the problem is they got rid of their dovetail piece. So a lot of the Russian units had optics that would fit on a dovetail, and I can show that real quick. So this is an RPK, and flip it around here. This piece right here is a dovetail mount for optics, and the newer AKs actually got rid of that and put rails on top of the dust cover. Because of that, they couldn't use any of their old optics. So Russians have this new rifle, new rail system that breaks if you put it into safety or take it off safe too quickly, and you can't mount any of the new optics to it. So they really didn't let the weapon system mature before they issued it. That sort of sums up the weapons that they're using. By and large, the Russians are using the Ratnik system. So the Russians have an armor suite that is by and large on par with Western nations. That being said, that gear was not evenly distributed among their military even at the beginning of the war. A lot of older steel plates are in use, and as those formations got attrited in the first couple of years, the Russian military-industrial complex, which did not anticipate a longer war, had to rush in and sort of fill the gap and produce a lot of lower quality steel plates, and also rapidly import gear from wherever they could, usually China. The militias also have a lot worse gear, like World War II surplus, as we mentioned, and they are not representative of the Russian army as a whole. But that being said, you can find virtually any kind of armor, any kind of gear in use by the Russians. They use a lot of captured gear. They even use the Ukrainians' camo, and the only thing to really differentiate is those colored armbands, which is really annoying. As you can see, the camouflage that they wear This is not the greatest when your environment is dead grass and wheat fields. You stick out like a sore thumb. A lot of Russian units have switched to the American-designed multicam. Um, it, they're in a bad way. They didn't really prepare for this war at all, and their gear really reflects that as the war continues. It's become a chaotic mismatch of random assortments of gear, whatever they can get their hands on. So this is the Russian military's standard body armor plate. This is a Ratnik plate. This is the GOST 6 version, so it's a little bit stronger than what is typically issued. But I've hit it with multiple different .308 rounds. This is a test that I conducted, I want to say in 2020, so a couple years before the war started. So forgive me if my memory is a little bit busted. But it did stop. It performed admirably. It took multiple 5.56 hits. It took multiple .308 and 30-06 hits. You can see there's some deformation, but it's not too bad. It's roughly in an IJ level 4 plate. That would be a good equivalent. I don't remember what the VPAM European equivalent is, but so there's a tungsten round that went through, but it largely stopped everything else. The Russians are capable of making good gear. Did they make enough? No. Nobody anticipated a long war. I've tested some of the Mobolnik gear. Their steel plates that they were issuing for, I want to say in late 2022 and in early 23, I think they're still issuing steel plates, but those sucked. Like, they couldn't even take one 5.56 round. But that being said, at least it was frag protection. So, they struggled. They certainly struggled. But now they've caught up, I would say. I suspect they have a pretty decent stock of steel core, and that plate would have stopped virtually everything up to tungsten. Just wouldn't stop a 50 cal, wouldn't stop a drone explosion, wouldn't stop an artillery piece, obviously. But, very good plate. The Russians are capable of making good stuff. The ceramic in those plates is very similar to what's used in nuclear reactors and tanks as well for the composite armor. So anyone that's capable of making body armor, or anyone that's capable of, how would I put this? Anybody that has a nuclear program or a strong armored core is capable of making infantry body armor. So China. The Ukrainians have received firearms and infantry equipment from virtually every European nation. It's easier to list the nations that have not donated gear than the ones that have. But before the war started, though, the Ukrainians did have a decent standard with their infantry equipment, with 8 years of NATO training, and really have had an indigenous rearmament program since 2014. Their army has a culture that can only be described as festering anger against Russia. And once the Russians did attack, they got to use that anger. But as far as the gear is concerned and weapons, even Luxembourg donated NLAWs and anti-tank weapons within the first month of the war. Every assault rifle that was produced in Europe, like since the 50s, has been seen in the conflict. Every rifle, every NATO country has given weapons and infantry equipment. So you see everything. You see Bren 2s, you see SCARs, a lot of Armalite variants. Notably, some Dymaco ARs from the Netherlands and the Dutch keep showing up. Any weapon that you can possibly think of, every small arm in the world, virtually, has shown up in Ukraine. Especially anti-tank weapons as well, making the most difference. There are some countries that are on the fence supplying lethal aid. South Korea and Israel don't want to supply lethal aid, but still have supplied bulletproof vests, helmets. So you really can see gear from virtually anywhere in the world. Everyone has come to stand behind Ukraine, and not so much can be said for Russia, with the exception of Iran. Iranian bulletproof body armor and helmets have been seen in use by Russia, but they're virtually alone, besides commercial gear that is bought off of China. And I would say there are tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides using Chinese imported body armor and ceramic. By and large, the AK-74 is the most popular option in Ukraine, but they have everything. Millions of rounds from 7.62 to 5.45 to 5.56. Anything you can think of, machine guns, The MG5 has been a high-profile weapon that's been showing up a lot. Excuse me. You can see entire units equipped with Czech weapons. You can see entire units equipped with French FAMAS. You can see virtually any rifle. You can see it's usually pretty organized. Like you'll see one group with one particular kind of rifle. But in other cases, you'll see a huge mismatch of whatever's available. Because a lot of the rifles use 5.56 anyway, so you can just pile on those same types. Ukraine captured a lot of Russian infantry equipment, and a lot of AK-12s are seeing use in more specialty weapons like the ASVAL or the VSSM, suppressed assault rifles. But generally, Ukraine uses a lot of Soviet weapons, so these blend into Ukraine's arms a little bit better. And I wouldn't say Ukraine captured enough small arms to really make a difference, even within the initial weeks of the war. The Ukrainians they're probably swimming in body armor at this point. There's a ridiculous amount. They don't have a problem equipping their infantry with body armor at this stage in the war. The Ukrainians are using a ton of donated gear. They have their own standard issue equipment and plate carriers that have been made by companies like Temp 3000 and Fort RPC. But largely, they have been using whatever they can get their hands on. In the opening stages of the war, a lot of American police departments donated their vests, but by and large, everything can be seen. Everything goes. I've seen a lot of Cry Precision. I've seen a lot of 511 Tactical. I've seen a lot of commercial brands in the United States showing up. Foreign vests of all kinds from virtually every different army can be found, which is ridiculous and sounds like a catch-all, but it really is the truth. If you look at one soldier, the soldier right next to him might be wearing something completely different, with the only unifying factor being, hey, he's got yellow tape around his arms. By and large, each Ukrainian soldier is equipped with a helmet, hard plates, and a rifle. I mean, everyone's equipped well. I wouldn't say that the Ukrainians are hurting just because they have such a random mismatch of gear. They're all very well equipped. And the infantry equipment side of things has been largely satisfied for the Ukrainian soldier. They are not really facing any kind of shortages or lack of gear, probably as much as the Russians have. But even the Russians, by and large, are well supplied at this point. That stage where the Russians went into the war and were struggling to meet equipment needs is largely over. Unfortunately for the Russians, that means a lot of it has been satisfied with lower quality steel plates. But even so, there's millions of dollars worth of Chinese ceramics entering Russia to fill that gap. So they've largely caught up. Their indigenous plates certainly stack up, but what I would say is they are supplemented by every NATO country in the world. Many civilian firms, countries like Taiwan, countries like South Korea, Japan even gave body armor. They have body armor and infantry equipment from all over the world, and it's world class. It's NIJ level 4 plates. There are a lot of misconceptions where there's pictures of Mobolnik and drafty soldiers complaining about the gear they've got, but that age has largely passed. Both sides roughly have comparable infantry equipment as far as weapons and armor go. Where I would say there's definitely a big difference is the optics and night fighting ability of both sides. I would say that Ukraine has been training that for the last 8 years and has been better equipped for that by the West compared to Russia. I would say that there are more like infantry level thermal and night vision devices on the Ukrainian side than the Russian side. And there's a lot of gaps in Russian training. Like a lot of them have not gotten familiar with how IR camouflage works. Hiding from night vision. They've gotten better at hiding from thermals because of the drone war, largely. It's hard to say. Roughly, the two sides are equal on infantry to infantry, as far as equipment is concerned, at least at this point. So there's a bit of a chicanery going around with South Korea. South Korea and Israel might be not supporting Ukraine with lethal aid in order to make money off of other countries that are rearming. But South Korea in particular might have a grudge on Ukraine because rocket technology from the Soviet Union was given to North Korea through Ukraine, if not by Ukraine. So South Korea might have a slight grudge there, not wanting to give lethal aid to someone that helped their enemies, probably not directly, but still there might be something to that. The militia, Luhansk and DNR militias have been seen with a lot of World War II weapons, and that is pretty eye-catching. But the headlines of Russian conscripts and soldiers getting issued Mosins is not the norm at all. Militia getting World War II surplus and not the Russian military, by and large. There are videos of Mobolniks getting rusty AKs from time to time. That is a very small case, small limited corruption issue. There's an apocalyptic amount of Soviet weapons and surplus still available to issue to soldiers. It's ridiculous. There's a World War II cache of hundreds of thousands of World War II weapons that was captured by the Russians in Soledar. I was not able to independently verify if that cache was there, but it would not surprise me. Both factions definitely have huge amounts of World War II weapons that are not really being utilized at this point because there really isn't a need. A significant amount of smuggled weapons sent by Iran to Yemen have been intercepted by the Navy and have also been donated to Ukraine. That was a good political win. Disclaimer, this discussion focused on small arms and infantry equipment. The import situation for both countries is obviously different when you talk about heavy weapons and other war material like microchips and superconductors.